it's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to say that something doesn't feel right, that something isn't comfortable. I think oftentimes we're not taught those skills to assert ourselves or even the language of how to assert ourselves. But sometimes it's just, I don't feel comfortable. And you don't even have to like give an explanation why. You not feeling comfortable is enough. And if it's not enough for your partner, well, that should tell you a lot too.
I'm your host, Jason Hopcus, and today we're diving into a conversation that is as inspiring as it is impactful. Joining me is Anne Connolly. She is the executive director of the Douglas County Healthy Youth Coalition, which is a Colorado-based organization with a mission of putting the health and well-being of Douglas County youth first through advocacy, education, and community partnerships. Anne is an empathetic social worker with close to 20 years experience in schools. Her current work includes district work in trauma responsive and restorative practices, as well as universal prevention practices. The Healthy Youth Coalition advocates for the physical and mental health of and well-being of Douglas County youth, partners with schools and community organizations to spread awareness about youth health, and empowers young people to take control of their health and well-being. And I'm thrilled to have you here today to talk about a topic that many might think is taboo, but definitely needs more awareness and attention: dating violence among teens. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. It's so good to be here and to talk about this important topic.
Yeah, so I guess just diving in, like, help us understand, you use the terms dating violence, and that sounds so ominous, and especially when you put in teens or with youth, and like, help us understand what that looks like among teens and young adults that might be different than what we're thinking or anticipating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say the first point of difference is really where young adults and teens are developmentally. When we're looking at dating violence, it's important to kind of keep that context in mind because teens and young adults are still in the process of developing their emotional intelligence, figuring out boundaries. They're also, dealing with self-esteem and building that. So they may struggle to identify unhealthy relationship dynamics or may also have limited experience recognizing some of the warning signs of abuse. Um, and teens and young adults, they typically have less experience communicating openly and assertively in their relationships, so they may lack that language or ability to assert boundaries or ask for help. And they're also still, and for the most part, living under their parents' roof. So there might be certain family dynamics at play. They may have also experienced or witnessed unhealthy relationships at home, which can contribute to their own view of what a relationship can or should look like. So, but
I,
as far as
I
sorry,
really love that. Just not to interrupt you there, is
yes,
um, the primary difference is the developmental difference between being a youth and being an adult, and recognizing that, you know, we're not fully formed as youth, and having the experience and maybe the modeling that's been shown to us has, of course, guided some of our perspectives in that. But I guess what I'm trying to understand is, what does it look like in a youth when we use those terms dating violence? Like, how does that really play out for youth?
yeah. So for young people, and then this could also be true for other people as well. But one of the primary ways that we might see dating violence occur is through digital and online abuse. That's particularly true for this younger generation because they have grown up with technology. But that might look like constant texting or checking in on them, monitoring someone's location, demanding that they give them their passwords. Just using social media to track them or harass them. There's also emotional and psychological abuse, and that can look like extreme jealousy, being very possessive, isolating someone from their friends and family, putting them down or intentionally humiliating them, or making threats or controlling what they wear or who they talk to. And then there's physical violence. So that, will look like pushing, shoving, grabbing, hitting, might be throwing objects, preventing them from leaving the room, any kind of unwanted physical contact.
Mhm.
And then there's also sexual violence as well. So that would look like pressuring for sexual activity, unwanted touching, not respecting someone's boundaries, sexual coercion, or also refusing to practice safe sex. And then, just some of the warning signs that you can be looking for, or you might notice if someone's experiencing dating violence in a relationship, can be if they have some injuries that they have difficulty explaining or just don't kind of match up with what their explanation is. For teens in school, their grades might start dropping, or they might have their attendance might not be where it was, or their performance overall is just declining in school. They might have a sudden change in their behavior or their mood, and they might withdraw from activities that they previously were very interactive with. um, they might make excuses for their partner's behavior, just say like, oh, it's not that bad, or he didn't mean it, or she didn't mean it. um, or they might be like fearful of making their partner angry. So those are just some, not an exhaustive list by any means,
Well,
but I also just
it's
want
a
to
pretty big list if you think
I
about
know. Yeah.
it. And I'm just what I'm hearing from you as you say that, and I think about, these are obviously challenges that adults can face, but there
Mhm.
also is an element in this where I go back to what you started the conversation with around the developmental piece of it. And what it sounds like really contextually adds to the conversation is, healthy boundary setting is really hard, oftentimes for many adults, but especially for
Mhm.
you. Like, you don't have the paces or the experience yet to know that, like, what you're going through is actually considered abuse or a violation of your values or your rights or your privacy. Like, I can imagine that's really weighty. Like, if I'm a parent and listening, how do I see these warning signs? Like, what are the things that I should be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I would be looking for if they're suddenly very secretive about things, or just, not wanting, and teens in general sometimes might not share as much with their parents as we might like them to. But if you, as a parent, you would recognize certain changes in behavior, certain things, like if they're if they're just withdrawing a little bit more, if they're not being as interactive or forthcoming with how their relationship is. It's not like teens are going to sit down and have this conversation of necessarily all the time of like, oh, this is how, like, what we did on our date and this is how we're doing. But also knowing if they seem like they don't want to talk about their relationship at all, or if the person that they're seeing isn't coming, either hasn't introduced themselves or isn't coming around, or on the flip side, if they're around way too much, because that could also be a sign that they're not giving your child independence or the ability to kind of do things apart from their partner.
Well, so
um
if I'm a parent, what
yeah,
I'm hearing from you is if something feels off, it may be, you know,
absolutely,
really,
yeah, yeah.
really leaning into your gut experience of, are
Mm,
these some unhealthy healthy things that are happening in my kid's life, which I think hopefully leads to more inspired conversation around what's going on. And again, we know that, kids are not always forthcoming and parents don't always think to ask the right questions, but I think there is an invitational opportunity that if something is going off for you on your radar, to have a
mm,
conversation about it. Like, if
yeah.
a parent and I, recognize something's going on, like, what's an appropriate way to open the door for that conversation, do you think?
I would say just finding a time that you can just sit down one on one and just really be open and honest. Just say, this is what I'm observing, this is what I'm worried about with what I've observed. What do you think about that? Or can you tell me, like, how you feel about what I'm saying? And just open that door of
Right.
communication. And also just, no matter what that response is, just be calm, non-judgmental, listen. And if it feels like you're getting a response and it's something that you don't know how to handle, either whether you're a parent or an older sibling or a friend, talk to that person about bringing in some help. To say, this seems bigger than what I can support you with, and but I think I'd like to get you some support, and can we talk to a professional about this, or can we, to get some help outside of just the two of us for this. But
I love
I think,
that. I think that's
yeah.
such an important reminder for people is, you don't have to be the hero in every conversation. Like, I think as humans, we're so hardwired to be the hero, but to recognize that, like, you may get into something that is out of your depths and you don't have a comfort level or the experience perhaps to really answer those questions appropriately or effectively. It is okay to say, I'm going to need some help, or can I get back to you on this, or like you've given me something to think about, like that's completely appropriate. And
Mhm.
I think what's coming up for me is the resonance of, if we're talking about, this in the context of an unhealthy relationship, what experience does somebody who's concerned coming in need to have around healthy relationships? Like, how do we talk
Mhm.
about the counterbalance of what we're seeing with our youth?
So, sorry, let me make sure I understand your question right. So, just kind of as far as the person helping them, what experience do they need to have in their own relationships
Not
or,
even in their own relationships, but
okay,
if the goal is to show up and say, this is what I'm recognizing, and you feel
yeah,
confident in going into the conversation around understanding healthier relationships, like what's some feedback you can give your youth or teen around, this is what this should look like versus this is what I'm
uh,
seeing and maybe your experience.
okay. Yeah. I would say start with there's so many great resources on online that you can even start with to look at to give yourself the language, or even just the information when you enter that conversation. One Love Foundation has really great information on just the 10 signs of an unhealthy relationship and the 10 signs of a healthy relationship.
Okay.
And looking over those prior to that conversation will help you also be able to have just that supporting evidence and supporting information to say, well, I've noticed that your partner is calling you like 50 times a day, but this is showing as a sign of an unhealthy relationship. If you're being bombarded by text messages or constantly, if the intensity of this relationship is so high that you can't even step away from it, or if they're belittling you in public or calling you names, that's a sign of, and I've noticed your partner do that, that's a sign of an unhealthy relationship. But then also point out, there's 10 signs to, and there's probably more than 10, but the 10 that they describe as being healthy, having independence, being able to be with your friends without being criticized or being made to feel guilty about that it's completely within your right and healthy for you to have friendships outside of your relationship. So, I mean, I would start there. There's so many other resources too, but I find that that's a good basis to start the conversation. Maybe even look over those lists. Like, what do you notice anything that is unhealthy in your relationship? And then also, what is healthy? Or what would you like to see become more healthy when you move on to other relationships?
Of course, and that all seems like practical, sensible advice. I guess if I'm a youth that's listening, how can I ensure that I'm building a connection based on trust and respect and open communication? Like maybe I'm not certain of, is this abusive or not? Like, and I want to have a healthier dialogue with the person I'm building relationship with.
You know, that's a great question. As far as just making sure that that there's trust, I think that doesn't come right away. That's going to come with time. But I guess number one, I would say trust your instinct. I think like if you are feeling like this, you're in a relationship that isn't healthy or there's something wrong, and maybe you can't even put your finger on it. Talk to somebody about it. Talk to a friend you think might understand, or a parent, or a counselor at school. But trust it doesn't always come easily in a relationship, so you have to give that time, and not assume that just because you're dating someone that all of a sudden things are just going to be perfect and everything is going to just be great just because you are attracted to one another. um, you need to be having conversations with one another. You need to be, when you feel ready to do so, be open about who you are, be open to hearing about who they are, and then over time, just get to know one another, and that trust will come eventually, so long as you all are giving each other that time and that space and being open and honest with one another.
Yeah, and there are so many pressures in being a teen today. I mean, it's just it's overwhelming to think about the
Yes.
things that are being put on teens. And I do think a key differentiator among this generation versus others prior to, the integration of technology in quite the way that it has really put an additional layer of burden on them to navigate what I'm hearing from you. There are a lot of issues that stem from access. Somebody having, unfettered access to you and your device at any point
Mhm.
that you have it available to you. And like there's this barrage of things that can come from somebody having that kind of unlimited access that may feel really good at first or continue to feel good, but recognizing that it may be harmful for you. Like, what does that look like in terms of, I think of those as red flags. Like,
Mhm.
what are some red flags that somebody listening might, even as a self-assessment, want to go through and think about, is this healthy or not?
Yeah, I would say, and this is also coming from some of this information is coming from the One Love Foundation too, which has great resources. But like one of the first red flags I would notice or would be brought to my attention would be is if the relationship is moving super fast, super quickly. If the intensity of it is just seems like just so strong and so fast. Because sometimes like expressing those over the top extreme feelings, that can be really overwhelming to somebody on the receiving end of that. But it also could, for young people who may not recognize that as a warning sign, they might view that as, oh, this person is really into me. This person really likes me, and might not recognize that as something that is unhealthy. But you really want to look at the pace of the relationship. That's like how that's being set and who it's being set by. Is this mutual? Do you both feel like this is comfortable, or do one of you feel like this is moving way too fast? Um, another warning sign would be if like possessiveness, if someone is feeling, jealousy is a normal feeling, but beyond what the normal bounds of jealousy might look like, to the point where they're actually trying to control who you spend time with, what you do, because that can be unhealthy when it starts becoming something controlling, or if they're lashing out at you. So, and sometimes it can often be excused as overprotective or having really strong feelings for somebody. But again, when it becomes to the point where they're controlling what you're doing or trying to, that's a big red flag.
And I
Likewise, if
go
they're, yeah.
I go back to, sorry to interrupt, but
Oh,
I go
no,
back
no, you're
to,
good.
like, if it feels off, it likely is off. And I think
Hmm.
so many of us have those gut feelings that just are like, something doesn't feel right about this.
Hmm.
I want to reiterate for any young person that might be listening, or even for parents that are listening for their youth, like, like this is likely not the only relationship you're ever going to be in, but it is
Hmm.
really important to establish a self maintenance of boundaries, that then leads to having healthier relationships across the continuum of your life. Like, these are important lessons.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about boundaries before too, but I would say, as you said, for any young person listening, it's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to say that something doesn't feel right, that something isn't comfortable. I think oftentimes we're not taught those skills to assert ourselves, or even the language of how to assert ourselves. But
Right.
sometimes it's just, I don't feel comfortable. And you don't even have to like give an explanation why. You not feeling comfortable is enough. And if it's not enough for your partner, well, that should tell you a lot too.
Right. I think that's really wise counsel. You know, nobody's perfect community was really built to support youth, parents, caregivers, providers, and
Mhm.
educators with the things that they're struggling with. And I mean, obviously, what we're talking about here does have an impact on mental health. Like, can you give us some
Mhm.
ideas of what the psychological and emotional impacts of these things can be on young people?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, particularly at this stage of development, it has a being in a relationship that is unhealthy or abusive can have really long lasting effects for people. Just emotional scars that can last a long time. And that can also that can be with their self esteem too, because a lot of times being in an unhealthy relationship can really erode your confidence and your feelings of self worth.
Right.
If they've been isolated, they may feel like they don't have friends or family that they can go to. They may feel very alone in this situation. If there's been physical altercations, then there could also be physical effects that they are enduring as well. And for young people, I know we talked about just academics. This could be interfering with their performance in school, which could then impact just their future endeavors as well. And I would also say that, a lot of times victims in this situation might engage in some unhealthy coping strategies to deal with some of the emotional and psychological pain that they're going through. So that might be like turning to substances or cutting or other unhealthy ways of coping with some of their feelings. So I mean, it's a very complex situation, and especially given the developmental stage of the person who is dealing with it, can can certainly have very long lasting effects.
I hear that. And it's so unfortunate that, these are the added pressures that teens are dealing with today, certainly than
Mm,
everything else that they're dealing with. We've talked a lot about what I'm going to consider more internal factors of dating violence.
mm.
What are cultural or social factors, the societal norms or peer pressure or cultural influences? How do they sometimes play a role in normalizing or perpetuating this situation among teens and young adults?
Yeah, I would say as far as like the cultural, social, at this stage of development, the first one I would say would really be around like peer pressure or just like fitting in socially sometimes can have an effect. Because, especially at this age, teens they're very influenced by their peers. And if they are feeling like having a boyfriend or a girlfriend or will help them maintain some kind of social status or help them fit in, then they might be more likely to stay in a relationship that's not healthy just to maintain that social status. Or maybe they don't want to be um, known as the person who blew the whistle on this popular kid at school or whatever that might look like.
Right.
I would also say just technology and just living in the digital age. I know we talked about it a little bit before, but I think that has a really big impact on youth, probably even more than what data even tells us right now, or the research even tells us. Just, you know, beyond it, in person unhealthy behaviors, you can't even be home alone without necessarily being barraged via text or social media. Um, and also just that privacy sometimes can go away with technology too, whether it's put on blast by other people or you know, you've been coerced into sending a picture of yourself to your partner and then it's blasted around social media, things like that. It just adds a whole other element of stress to the situation. And I think with media too, and there are a lot of messages that we get through popular media, through movies and music, shows that can sometimes depict violence in relationships almost as romantic and exciting. Um, and that can really contribute to our distorted view of healthy relationships or what a relationship should look like because it's not a normal depiction or an accurate depiction, and it certainly isn't depicting a healthy relationship most of the times.
For sure. And
Yeah,
as you talk about the role that technology plays in this, I mean, there are many roles that it plays, and
yeah, yeah.
distill it down to one. But I do think the most critical thing that we've touched on here is really this element of access. I mean, if you think about, I'm going to say the old days, not to date myself, like if you were going to be bullied, somebody had to do it at school or after school or come to your house or call you on the phone at home. It was not this 24/7 access. And again, I know many kids have, monitored devices where they don't have access 24/7, but there are some that do. And the reality is there is an opportunity for somebody to have access to you in a way that didn't used to exist. And I think that that has had a definite impact on a lot of these things that we're seeing have some maladaptive behaviors come from them. And, even from a youth perspective, being able to better regulate your usage and set those boundaries with yourself, I think is really important because
Hmm.
if you're having a hard time limiting your technology and device uses, I mean, the fact of the matter is you may need some some self counsel on this is not healthy for me, and I need to pull back
Hmm.
from this, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Hmm. Yes, absolutely. Um, and even tracking, I mean, not even just accessing, but like now there's like tracking apps and things like that, which can add to another layer of just of access to people, you know, where it's like I know that you were what were you doing at Starbucks earlier today, and who were you with? And because you can now, if, but that's also a boundary that can be set as far as I don't want you tracking me. I'm not giving you I can't remember what it's called. Is it a snap location or my whatever it is? But
Well,
I'm
whatever it is, it's a
yeah,
violation of privacy.
right.
And I mean, again, I understand there are people that want somebody to have that access to them and know that.
Hmm.
And again, there's not any criticism about that either. But if there's something that feels, in your soul that this is off and it doesn't
Yeah.
make sense for me, like I think there are some different parameters you can set around what does having healthy boundaries around this look like? And if I'm a parent today and I'm noticing something that's going on, like I think to your point earlier, having a conversation about it is obviously a wonderful starting point. But if you're looking about next steps and practical tips, it may look like being a little more engaged in what your youth is doing online and how
Hmm.
they're showing up in the digital world and setting some boundaries around, do we put the phones in the basket at,
Hmm.
8 o'clock or whatever, like set the
Right.
boundaries that work for you. But I do think it's
Yeah.
important as loved ones of youth to really help navigate this kind of desolate landscape that can frankly have some pretty dire consequence.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point as far as something that parents can be doing is continuing to check in on that and monitoring that with, within certain limits, but also just say this is my job as a parent and just making
Right.
sure that, you're safe. I wouldn't send you out into, off into the streets. Like it's almost the same navigation of the social media and technology is it's just a technical technology street, so to speak, that just want to keep you safe on those streets.
Well, and the thing that we've heard a lot, which I think is the disruption of the work that we're doing, is a lot of this work
Mhm.
does shine spotlights back on loved ones who are responsible for raising youth. And, as adults, many of us don't have good technology boundaries within ourselves and maybe don't have the healthiest relationships. And some of the things that we've done are being mirrored in our youth. Like, I want to give anybody that's listening a real passive grace for this because I think it's important to
Mhm.
recognize that even if you haven't made the best decisions, it doesn't mean from today moving forward you can't make healthier decisions and really acknowledge your role and say, "Hey, I recognize some things that I've done showing up in your situation, and I think we have an opportunity to both do better." I think there is a
Mhm.
real learning and growth opportunity for anybody who's listening, saying, "Gosh, I'm guilty of the same things, and how do I mirror this in a better way for my youth?" Like, start where you are. Like that that
Mhm.
that is step one, and recognizing that we can champion each other in
Mhm.
kind of some healthier skills.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think, and recognizing that we all have a role in it, that we all play some kind of role in helping creating just a community and a, or a home life that is healthy and free from violence.
Right. So to fast forward, if I now recognize or it has come to my attention that I am perhaps in an abusive relationship and I want to take steps to leave that, like what are
Mhm.
some appropriate steps to do that? Because I know that has a lot of
Yeah.
consequences that bring up a whole nother.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And you already named one of the first ones is just acknowledging. I think that sometimes in itself can be one of the hardest steps in leaving an unhealthy relationship is recognizing that you're actually in one.
That's
That
huge.
yeah. Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. It's huge because I mean, relationships don't start with, somebody, hitting you or uh, berating you in like your first month or even few months of dating. This happens slowly over time, and the relationship changes, and you might be remembering kind of the early stages, or might be thinking, well, this isn't really who this person is, or they'll change. But recognizing that what's happening isn't going to change and that it is unhealthy is definitely it's step number one, and for a lot of people can be the hardest one. Um, I would also recommend that people just seek support. So once you've acknowledged this, just reach out. I mean, breakups in general can take a toll on all of us and impact our lives, but the complexities of a abusive relationship make that even harder. So seeking help of like a counselor or even calling there's the National Domestic Abuse Hotline you can call, and other resources as well. Even if you wanted to just run the situation by a professional or somebody and say, this is what I've experienced. Can you provide me support? If you are in a relationship that is violent and abusive and you fear for your safety, creating a safety plan is very important.
Okay.
And generally that's like a list of actions, phone numbers, resources, supports that you can access when leaving an abusive situation. Um, so that would include names of people that you can call, places you can go. But it will help you feel more prepared in the situation, knowing that you have a plan in place should something become violent.
Right.
Um,
And I
and I'd
really
also,
hate to hear that anybody's in a situation that they need
yeah,
a safety plan, but I mean, this is the reality. These things are happening.
mhm, yeah,
While it may not be happening to you, it could be happening to somebody that you love or you know. And
mhm,
there is an awareness for all of us to be more mindful of these things happen.
yeah. And when someone is leaving the situation, leaving an abusive relationship, that is when they are at most risk of violence or of death, even because um, that is the most volatile time in the relationship, and they are most unsafe at that time when they are leaving. So also being aware of that, creating that safety plan, having supports in place. I would also suggest just keeping records of anything and everything, any incident, no matter how small you think it may have been. Date, location, time, details of what happened, pictures if there's bruises, if there's messages that were sent through your phone or voicemails, save everything. I would say, just in case you need it for any legal action, because these can be really difficult to prosecute in court, and any evidence and details that you can provide are going to be really imperative.
I'll just reiterate, I think it's heartbreaking that we're even having this
Yeah,
conversation. And
yeah,
I just I can't really imagine trying to navigate that as a youth that should have a happy, healthy experience in growing up in
hmm
the world and knowing all of these external factors that can play into things. We've talked a lot about, kind of the real world experience of this. And I think as we wrap up, the one thing that I would love for us to talk about, like, what are the preventative measures that we think that we could be taking, whether it's as parents or as schools or as professionals that do this work that hopefully shine light on, this is a real thing and, there are some dire consequences that can come from this. Like, how do we preemptively stop this problem before it actually starts?
yeah. I mean, I would say starting young in schools. It that doesn't mean you're saying, "Oh, this is what dating violence is," but it's more around teaching young children at an early age what is consent, what is a boundary. Like when someone says no to you, that means no. And when you say no, that means the person should be respecting you as well. Just really teaching, that language, and just um, general lessons around what being a healthy, it could start as being a healthy friend, and this is what healthy friendship looks like. But that also relates down the road to a healthy relationship. I think teaching young people to recognize warning signs of an unhealthy relationship. And I know I mentioned One Love a few times already, but they have a really great educational component to their website that can just easily be taken and taught as a lesson in a class in middle or high school, and helps young people recognize the red flags, the warning signs, but also teaches them what a healthy relationship looks like as well. But opens up that line of discussion so they can be thinking about that. And I think just as a community as a whole, I think we all have a part in really promoting protective factors for our young people, really just creating environments that support their healthy development. And just really, whether that means serving as a mentor to a young person, or um, providing some type of an activity or outlet that helps foster their healthy growth, and just being a a, a community member that really supports young people, whatever that might look like, so um, and just also not tolerating abuse or unhealthy language or things like that when we see it, um, and for just advocating for policies that support women or anyone who is at risk of violence or and who would need treatment or anything like that. So, but I
The
think it
great
is a
thing
community.
is it sounds like there are really good resources out there.
Yes, yeah.
And if you're a loved one or an educator or somebody just in the community that wants to be a better supporter, I mean, checking in with those resources, it sounds like you're going to learn some things. It sounds like One Love's got some great resources.
Hmm. Yeah.
Better educate yourself on what are the things that you need to look for. I mean, I know we've talked a lot about those today, and really acknowledging like this is
Mhm.
a challenge that exists in society, and if you're in the know or responsible for youth in today's world, I think better educating yourself around what's happening, I think is prudent. It's a wise decision.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing, and that you were willing to come and talk to us about this really important topic today. I have one question I ask all of my guests before we end. What does nobody's perfect mean to you?
Oh, wow. I mean, it's to me, it just would mean that we all are going to make mistakes in life. We all are going to go through life and maybe, um, either go through challenges or difficulties or feel like there's things that we regret. But instead of like living in that regret, instead of feeling like um, that that you have to be stuck in those moments, knowing that we are not we are not our mistakes, we are not our lowest points in our lives, that we are going to have moments of imperfection, and that's what makes us all human. And learning from those mistakes, learning from our imperfections, and allowing those to inform us to be who we would like to become. But I think we all grow stronger from our mistakes, so long as we're willing to acknowledge them and learn from them.
That's beautiful, and I couldn't agree more. Again, thank you for being here and for the work that you're doing. It's so valuable and necessary. I appreciate you, and I'm so glad you could contribute today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been great to be here. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you for being a part of the Nobody's Perfect community dedicated to supporting, inspiring, and empowering youth and families. We hope you enjoyed today's transformative conversation. Together, we are dismantling stigma and providing solutions for mental health and well-being challenges so everyone can thrive. Join us every other week on cozy101.com/imperfect or on your favorite streaming platform to continue embracing our shared human experience. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, visit nobodysperfect.community to get immediately connected to a hub of clinically approved mental health resources and tools designed to support you wherever you find yourself on your journey. And be sure to follow at Nobody's Perfect Community on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. I'm your host, Jason Hopcus, and it's been a pleasure having you here. Stay connected, stay inspired, and remember, nobody's perfect because perfection isn't real. Your story is. Until next time.